There's a topic that I've been thinking about for a long time that you might also be interested in, and I would like to share my thoughts on it with you. The topic is the rise of the Agile coach as a profession, and I'll be looking at it from a psychologist's point of view. This will be a somewhat difficult talk, not because I'm making it unnecessarily complicated, but because the topic itself is quite difficult and complex. On the other hand, I hope you find it as fascinating as I do. First off, who am I? I myself am not an Agile coach, although in my work I do many things that would be considered as Agile coaching. On the one hand, I'm a psychologist with a degree in forensic psychology and psycholinguistics and with additional training in clinical psychology and psychotherapy. Over the past 6 months, I have mainly worked in this profession, offering counseling and support for medical and other personnel who've been pushed to their performance and stress limits during the COVID pandemic, as well as for friends and colleagues who are suffering from the effects that the pandemic has had on their jobs and on their futures. On the other hand, I am an Agilist. I entered software development back in the late 1980s when I started developing artificial intelligence software, known at the time as expert systems. Working with the programming language Smalltalk, I met Kent Beck. In 1996, Kent asked for my help with customizing the development tools his team was using on a project so that they could support a new development method that he was working on. The project, the Chrysler C3 project, was the world's first Agile project, and the development method was called extreme programming. I was fascinated by Agile, and after extreme programming, I started working with Scrum, where I became the first certified Scrum Master and Scrum trainer in Europe. Over the past 25 years, I've seen the Agile movement develop, and I've discovered that the most exciting questions and problems for me are not of a technical nature, but of a human nature. This caused me to go back to my roots in psychology, and nowadays I help organizations deal with the challenges of agility and help individuals deal with the challenges of these organizations. So, how did we get to where we are now? In 1962, Everett Rogers published his book, The Diffusion of Innovations, based on his research into the adoption of new products and technologies. Although you probably are familiar with this graph, you might not know that Rogers defined his 5 groups based on the demographic and psychological characteristics of the groups. He assumed that people's behavior towards new products is influenced by their peers and by their belief in how widespread something is. The innovators are more educated, financially better off, and more risk-oriented. Early adopters tend to be younger, also more educated, more what we would call influencers, but less prosperous. The early majority, more conservative, but open to new ideas, and still quite socially active. The late majority, on the other hand, tend to be older, less educated, conservative, and less socially active. And the laggards are very conservative, tend to have a small financial capital, and tend to be the oldest and least educated of all the groups. Almost 30 years later, in 1991, Geoffrey Moore published his book, Crossing the Chasm, in which he proposed a new idea. Moore said that with so-called disruptive technologies, technologies that change the way we interact with each other and with the technology, there's a break in this curve, a so-called chasm or a gap. Only technologies that can cross the chasm and make it into the mainstream are viable, no matter how good the technology itself is. The acceptance in the mainstream almost starts all over again as a kind of S-curve. There are numerous cases of superior technology that didn't make it into the mainstream, with a prime example being Betamax video, a production-grade video format used by television stations, but which lost the fight for mainstream acceptance to VHS video cassettes. In 2011, my colleague William Petrie wrote an interesting blog post. He said that people's focus is not on ideas, but rather on products. The criteria for selecting a product are different for the different user groups. For early adopters, their drive to solve a problem or gain a competitive advantage or just to be cool is enough motivation to try new products. Late adopters lack this motivation and lack this desire for change and improvement. However, since there are a much larger number of these late adopters, they'll make up the majority of the market. And unlike early adopters, who are usually relatively self-sufficient, the late adopters will use more services, which makes them even more influential. They are also usually the least discerning consumers, the ones who are least able to tell the difference between the product they want and the product they need. Agile fell into this gap. Taken together, this means that vendors can make the most money by selling products that are mainly used to make late adopters look or feel like they are going somewhere or that they belong somewhere. The split is between companies that do Agile because they want to and companies do it because they must. I call this Me Too Agile. For late adopters, any actual work or discomfort beyond the minimum required would have a negative effect on their acceptance. Bad products, bad ideas often drive out the good ones, leading to fads. The common perception of the idea would be defined by the behavior and results of the majority and would bury the original idea. This is a second chasm. An idea that offers strong advantages to early adopters is made nearly unusable by mainstream consumers and by overly accommodating providers. This is where Agile is now, and we can see that reflected in the methods in common use today. In the beginning was extreme programming. XP is difficult and challenging, and it never made it into the mainstream. A number of XP practices did make it though, taking on their own life. For example, continuous integration, which has grown into DevOps, or the project management aspect of XP, which was once borrowed from and then came back to fruition as Scrum. Scrum, though, was too challenging and difficult for organizations that didn't really want to change. So ingenious vendors came up with even easier ways of enabling their customers to be able to say, "Me too." For example, if you want to say that you're Agile, all you need to do is clear out some space on a wall and hang up some Post-its. Not too many, though. Thus was Kanban, an excellent method for a specific problem domain, misappropriated. Or if you want to say you're Agile, all you need to do is rename your teams and your departments. Just call them squads and tribes. This was a Spotify model, a flexible model for a music streaming startup, which is now sold as a way for 100-year-old banks and insurance companies to call themselves Agile. There are even other new methods that were developed to sell agility whilst ensuring that in the middle, nothing really changed. And in order to help all these late adopter organizations become Agile, a new profession arose, that of the Agile coach. So, if the need for Agile coaches is so great, where can you find them? A good friend of mine told me an example from dog breeding. They said that if a breed becomes popular, for example Dalmatians after the movie 101 Dalmatians, then it leads to an increase in the demand for puppies, and this entices dubious breeders to overbreed. Inbreeding and hereditary diseases increase in these breeds. Is that the case with Agile coaches? I don't know, but where do they all come from? Okay, the entry threshold is not very high. All you need to do to become an Agile coach is to open up your LinkedIn profile, type in the 2 words Agile coach, and save it. The most common gateway drug is the Scrum Master certification. Actually, using Scrum Master as an example, we can see certain parallels with the dog breeder example mentioned before. A few years ago, Scrum Masters were in short supply, and the Scrum Alliance was the only serious certification organization. Now, Scrum certifications are a big business, and there are countless providers where you can buy a certification without even attending a training course. In order to differentiate themselves and stand out from everyone else, many Scrum Masters now call themselves Agile Coach. In addition to Scrum Masters, there are various systemic, solution-focused, and other professional coaches who offer their services as Agile coaches. And recently, as jobs in HR departments have become increasingly rare, more and more organizational psychologists are jumping on the Agile bandwagon. And then there are the lateral entrants from various other professions and with very different trainings who now work in the Agile coaching area. But what is Agile coaching, and who should be considered an Agile coach? This reminds me of the old story of the 6 blind men and the elephant. Everyone only feels part of the elephant. No one sees the whole animal, but everyone claims to know what an elephant is. I sometimes feel like the seventh blind man standing in the back and saying, I don't know what it is, but it stinks. Everyone with a different background brings something different to the table. Many bring something very valuable, but all of them claim jurisdiction over this area, and all of them are missing something. Whereby we come to a key point with the question of jurisdiction. The issue of jurisdiction and the problems associated with it is a sociological issue. One of the best books on this subject is Andrew Abbott's book, The System of Professions, an essay on the division of expert labor. Abbott views professions in terms of their jurisdiction, the tasks they perform, the expertise required for those jobs, and the power of internal-external competition, and how this all together changes both the jurisdiction and the functions of the profession. Abbott shows that professions are interdependent systems that contain internal structures. Different professions compete for their share of jurisdiction for an urgent existential problem. A successful profession must make socially plausible and institutionally enforceable that it, with its knowledge and methods, is the best equipped for solving and dealing with the problems at hand. Let's take a look at Agile coaching through Abbott's glasses and try to consider whether Agile coaching is a profession. We know what a professional opera singer is. It's a person who can make a living singing opera. But is an opera singer a professional in the relevant sense? What is a professional anyway? What are the relationships between the profession, occupation, skills, expertise, income, work, prestige, and eligibility? As we can see from the examples, there are various dimensions of qualification that we could intuitively take into account in order to define the concept of professional. Is it a person who makes their living practicing a skill or talent? Is it a person who has received formal training in a highly regarded type of job? Is it a person who is recognized by an accepted certification body? Is it a person who is a member of an organization made up of people doing the same kind of work? Or is it a person who has been awarded the social label professional by others in society? We can assume that the concept of professional is an overlapping concept that includes the intersection of skill, knowledge, credential, association, and prestige, with the implication that there are members of society who have several of these characteristics but not all, and are therefore not regarded as professional. Abbott's conceptual approach is signaled by the subtitle of his book, The Division of Expert Labor. He emphasizes abstract knowledge as the main criterion for an area of professional work that defines a profession. For abstraction is the quality that sets interprofessional competition apart from competition among occupations in general. Any occupation can obtain licensure, for example, beauticians, or develop a code of ethics, for example, in real estate. Only a knowledge system governed by abstractions can redefine its problems and tasks, defend them from interlopers, and seize new problems. Abstraction enables survival in the competitive system of professions. Expertise is an expression of abstract knowledge, and knowledge-based expertise is the result of formal training and serves as the basis for licensing. Andrew Abbott revolutionized the study of professions by arguing that professions did not work independently, but existed in a broader system. By a system, Abbott meant that the various professions always competed with each other as they tried to position themselves in the marketplace, and, in Abbott's terminology, to control valuable jurisdictions that were tangible in government-controlled professional boundaries and activities, and abstract in terms of cognitive abilities. Seeing professions, and especially professional companies, in a broader ecological system means understanding that professions are constantly battling each other for their professional niches. They covet the abilities of others and try to expand their own jurisdictions. To give an example, an interesting chain of events reflecting Abbott's theoretical description, occurred in IT back in the 1950s after IBM was banned from providing computer consulting by the United States Department of Justice. Since computers were mainly used for bookkeeping and accounting at that time, accounting consulting firms jumped into the niche in the market, especially the firms of Arthur Andersen and James McKinsey. Once again, a competition for jurisdiction gave rise to a new consulting segment, just as Abbott's model had predicted. When we turn back to Agile coaching, we can slowly see where many of the problems of defining the Agile coach come from. Not only do we have the elephant of the domain of coaching, we now also have the elephant of the job definition of an Agile coach as a professional. But not only that, while most studies treat professionalism or deprofessionalization of occupations as a unidirectional process, we assume that it's multidirectional. Some parts of a profession may become routinized and commoditized. Scrum Master certification, for example, while others can be expanded, specialized, and defined as a core element of a profession. Agile HR as an example. Given this multidimensional problem, it becomes clear that it is difficult to write a clear job description for an Agile coach. As mentioned before, coaches from different backgrounds bring various valuable perspectives and insights to the job. What can and what should we do? If, as Abbott writes, skill is an expression of abstract knowledge and becomes the basis for admission to a profession, can we even agree on what that knowledge is? I feel the elephant walking past again. The same goes for an possible accreditation as an Agile coach. If it is impossible to define exactly what specialist knowledge an Agile coach needs, it's even more difficult then to certify skill in practicing and executing this knowledge. In my dual role as a psychologist and as an Agilist, I work with many organizations facing challenges with adopting and adapting Agile practices, but I work even more with Agile coaches of all types, helping them to cope with the confusing challenges that they are exposed to and helping them to do their job as well as possible. At least I try to do this, and based on feedback, I normally succeed. I would like to close this difficult lecture with a few tips that I give my friends and my colleagues. Maybe they'll also help you with your work. I don't know anything. One of my goals as a therapist is to have a position of safe uncertainty, of being comfortable in not knowing. That leads me to explore with a person or with a team the ideas and meanings they bring with them. If one of the central goals of my work is to open up the idea of the existence of other possibilities, provide an expansion of the solution space, then it's clearly counterproductive to find myself in a position of premature security of already knowing the answer. However, that does not mean that a personal attitude that involves safe uncertainty equates to the view that we cannot own our expertise. It is possible to have strong beliefs and still be consistent with the not knowing attitude. Barry Mason writes that when we can become less certain, we are more likely to be receptive to other possibilities, to other meanings that we might give to events. When we become more open to the potential influence of other perspectives, we open up space for other views to be expressed and heard. Only when we are sure about the attitude of not knowing or the fact of not knowing can we be so wide open and in the here and now that we do not overlook any of the weak but important signals that are on the way. So, to close up this talk, I would like to mention my list of skills that I look for in someone who calls themselves an Agile coach. First, be honest about your skills. Don't sell yourself as someone you aren't just to get a job. In this profession, fake it until you make it is not a good strategy. Know the boundaries of your competencies and don't be afraid or embarrassed to ask for help or to recommend someone with more experience. I personally look for people who have a high ability for self-reflection and honesty. If you want to understand more about the problems of people who are lacking this ability, just Google Dunning-Kruger effect. Be aware of your biases. Be aware of the glasses you symbolically wear that filter the information that you receive. And most important, being a good coach requires a humility that comes from understanding that the elephant is there, from understanding that you can never see more than part of the whole, an understanding which only comes from often painful experience. So, if you're an agile coach in any way, shape, or form, and you want to get better in your craft, what can you do? First, mindfulness training. Increase your awareness and your sensitivity to all the subtle and weak signals being sent out around you. Second, fill up your toolbox. Don't think T-shaped profile. Think in terms of something that Kent Beck calls a paint drip person. Think of taking a paintbrush, dipping it deep into paint, and running it across a wall where randomly paint drips down in different places. Find out, you might be surprised what other skills you have in you. Last but not least, mentoring. Work with someone who's experienced as a coach and experienced in helping you to get to be the best person and the best coach you possibly can. That's all for today. Thank you.